Welcome to a room where the light makes bars on the wall. A small square of morning pressed through a shutter. A line of dust that floats, then vanishes, then floats again, as if even the dust is holding its breath. There is a table with a bowl of water on it. There is a scrap of cloth folded to a pointed prow like a child's toy boat. There is a woman, head wrap knotted with the neatness of habit, standing so still the floorboards forget to creak. In Charleston, June 1822, the air is heavy with salt and rumor, with the iron tang of nails warmed by the sun, with the low drum of hooves on cobblestone, and the higher clatter of patrol sabers that say, "Do not run, do not speak, do not be seen." A notice ink still wet is hammered to a post outside, names nailed to wood, as if wood remembers better than people do. A bell hesitates in a steeple, one beat late, as though even brass is afraid to ring. Before we go further, join the story. In the comments, tell us where you're watching from and the exact timestamp you pressed play. Type, "Remember her name" if the bars of light on that wall made your chest tighten. And share one name, any name, of a woman in your own family whose courage rarely got written down. Your words will live here with hers, breath to breath, city to city. They have a name they will remember. They will carve it into pamphlets and court minutes and table talk. They will build a gallows in rumor before they raise it in wood. But this story begins with the name they do not say, the one that moves only on breath and in kitchens, at pumps, and under shawls, in the pause between a hymn and the hush after it. Her name is Beck. She is a mother, 2 small shirts folded on a peg, a pair of shoes not yet big enough for Sundays. She is a wife to a man the city calls conspirator, as if the word erases the love that built this room, this life, this plan to buy her freedom, to buy the children's, to make paper obey what the heart already knows. He went to a desk. He counted money. He was told no. No, because the law can measure flesh and call it ledger. No, because freedom purchased by the enslaved frightens the city more than chains ever could. No, because a door in a wall is a dangerous idea. He came home with the no in his hands. She took it, folded it small, tucked it into the same corner where she keeps her grief. Grief learns to live in corners until one day it pulls itself upright and asks for light. Listen. Do you hear that? The morning has a specific sound in Charleston: gulls arguing about scraps, wheel hubs complaining at sharp turns, water slapping pilings in a rhythm that could be a work song if anyone dared sing. And layered beneath that, another rhythm: steps that pause at intersections, voices that drop on certain names, the half-words that mean everything to those who know how to hear them. Beck hears them all. She knows the city's second language, the code that rides inside ordinary things. A loaf of bread wrapped twice means wait. A red thread slipped into a palm means tonight. A bottle left on a doorstep with its mouth turned toward the street means the street is safe. She is an archivist of breath, a librarian of the unrecorded, binding the unprintable into a book only the living can read. In the room, the light slides higher. On the table, the bowl of water is perfectly still, perfect, in that way that feels like a dare. Beck touches the cloth boat and stops. Outside, somebody laughs, the brittle laugh of men pretending not to be afraid. Inside, a fly tracks lazy circles, and the sound seems enormous, like the world has shrunk to this room, and the circle is a clock, and the clock is counting down. Somewhere a prayer is swallowed mid-sentence. Somewhere a child is told to hush and not asked why they were talking. Somewhere a bell rings again, properly this time, as if it regrets the hesitation and will not make that mistake a second time. They call it conspiracy, this gathering of breath and hope. They call it plot, scheme, threat words, built to make fear sound like law words that give men permission to be cruel so long as they do it in daylight. But inside the words are the faces. A seamstress who sews in messages along hems. An old man who forgets his age when he hears the word freedom and then remembers it again and sits down. A child who learns a song with a different last note, the extra beat where you learn to step around terror. And Beck, who has crafted a map of the city that lives in her body, when to walk fast, when to drift, where to let the patrols see her, and where to become part of the woodwork, the wash line, the air. All stories want a single thing, a line you can follow. This one refuses. It is made of broken lines, of interruptions, of official voices that drown out the ones that matter most. The record will give you dates and numbers and the confident handwriting of men who never doubted their right to decide what is true. The record will tell you he was tall and persuasive and dangerous to order. The record will say there was a plan. The record will try very hard not to say the names of the women. You can feel the energy of the unsaid buzzing like summer flies at a window. You can feel the edges of the pages where a name nearly breaks through, where an initial stands in for a life, where a wife is written as a possession, even in her husband's courage. But if you step closer, if you hold your ear not to the printed page, but to the old pine of the table, to the water in the bowl, to the breath drawn in that small room, another archive opens. It lives in the way a head wrap is knotted, for walking, not working. It lives in the decision to take the long alley, not the short lane. It lives in the knowledge of when the patrol on Anson Street laughs too easily, laughs like men who have already been told something they think will make them safe. It lives in how a woman can move a message across 5 backyards without ever being seen carrying anything. Beck moves her hand. The cloth boat skims, then stops, its pointed nose turned toward the door. She nods once. The nod is not to herself, it is to the future, to a listener she cannot see, to a child not yet born, who will ask why no one remembered the mothers. She takes the bowl in both hands. The water wobbles, but does not spill. The floorboards remember and creak a single syllable, an old house's language, forgo. Charleston inhales. A steeple glints like the edge of a blade. A list of names, some forced from mouths in windowless rooms, some whispered into existence as Shields unfurls in an office where the ink has already decided what it will write. In the quarters, a hymn changes key, just a hair, as if the song itself has learned to look over its shoulder. The day leans forward. The rope is still a coil asleep in the corner of another room, but every shadow knows its shape. If this opening found, you don't just watch, participate. Comment your city, your timestamp, and type the name of one woman history taught you to overlook. Then share this video with the words, "Remember her name." The archive we're building needs your breath too. This is the moment before the city writes itself into stone. This is the moment where breath still has jurisdiction. This is the moment when a mother chooses how to hold a fear so large it could swallow a century. Does she speak? Does she run? Does she wait and let waiting be a weapon? Does she hand the message to the next set of hands? The answer is not on paper. It is in the angle of her shoulders as she steps through the doorway, in the way she does not look back, in the way the light bars fall behind her, and she walks through them like water. Remember this room. Remember the bowl. Remember the cloth boat and the line of dust that paused when she did. Remember the bell, how it hesitated, then found its voice. Remember that official memory would sooner forget a mother than admit a city can be afraid of one. And as we begin, type it once more. Remember her name. Beck, June 1822. Charleston, South Carolina. Heat pressed low like a heavy hand over a city of iron balconies and palmetto shadows. The harbor breathes in salt and tar. Gulls argue over fish guts near the wharves. Ropes groan on cleats. A bell rings from a steeple that can see the river and the roofs and the alleys where stories never get written down. Rice money glitters in counting houses, quiet as a blade sheathed in velvet, while in backyards and cookhouses voices keep a second ledger. The breath archive, the account book of those whom paper refuses to name. You can taste iron on the air nails warmed by sun hinges, oiled against squeaks, shackles wiped clean in case someone important passes by. Charleston performs itself as order uniforms, ordinances, patrol routes, memorized like a hymn sung off key. Yet the city's true music is syncopated. Pauses. Sudden half-steps. The way people look away when a patrol's boots clatter past, then look back when the boots are gone. Walk the streets with us. Slow, then slower, so the world can come into focus. East Bay. Damp stone and shipyards, bales stacked like the tidy conscience of a trade that has none. Broad Street. Counting rooms, cool with shade receipts copied in ink that never smudges though hands do. Meeting Street. Carriages, ladies' parasols, the rustle of plans that will never be called by their right names. Behind those fronts, behind the shutters and the cisterns and the laundry lines, Charleston's other city hums enslaved women rinsing rice until their fingers prune white. A blacksmith tapping a rhythm that might be a code. A child tracing letters in dust because paper belongs to other people. The houses look like certainty symmetry columns polish, but the alleys between them are the true map, the lines where news travels on foot and by glance and by a loaf of bread, wrapped twice. Listen. Here is the cadence of the day, as Beck hears it. Before sunup, water-drawn embers coaxed a hymn, hummed under breath so softly it cannot be prosecuted. Dawn deliveries, pale thread of smoke rising from kitchen chimneys. Front doors opened to test the heat like a cheek offered to a child. Mid-morning market noise vendors' calls, apples stacked like bright coins, and a whisper threaded through the shouts arrests, interrogations. A plan named treason by the men who refused to hear it called hope. Noon patrols change shifts. They laugh in the bright light, the brittle laugh of men who prefer daylight because the dark has better ears. Afternoon shadows lengthen. Chores bend the back and narrow the field of vision. Somewhere a cat sleeps on a threshold, as if thresholds were invented for cats. Dusk, when the city's two musics overlap, official bells and private steps, and the day's rumors grow teeth. Night windows shuttered. Breath shallow, a knock that might be wind, a wind that might be a knock. The room grows larger than the city, and the city fits itself inside the room like a threat that has learned to sit down. We set the stage not only with places, rooms, street steeples, but with instruments. The tools that write the fate of bodies. Handbills ink wet nailed to posts promising order and payment. Ledgers, debits, and credits that turn children into columns. Keys heavy in the hands of men whose power is the noise a lock makes. Rope coiled in corners of rooms meant for decisions. Rope that sleeps like a snake until someone wakes it with a verdict. Pews smooth under palms that fold to pray and clench to endure. Basins where water reflects a face that will not be recorded. Head wraps tied for work, tied for walking, tied for mourning that has not yet announced itself. Every object carries a second meaning, a subscript the powerful cannot read. Beck occupies a room in a yard behind a house that pretends it does not know her name. The floorboards are pine soft. They remember every step and swear it was theirs. The table is scarred by knives that cut bread, not flesh. Yet every knife is an argument with the century. A single window faces a lane where the day empties itself like a pocket buttons. Thread a nail that could be a key if you hold it differently. She knows the room's three weathers morning bars of light that tell her how slowly the day will pass. Noon brightness that has the cruelty of certainty. Evening dark that makes the world honest. On a peg, 2 small shirts for Sundays that will not come soon. Beneath the bed, a bundle of letters she cannot read, saved, because paper itself is evidence that someone thought words might matter. The city will remember her husband's name, carpenter conspirator, the man who tried to buy what the law insists cannot be sold when the buyer is the enslaved. But this room remembers Beck, and rooms are better archivists than courts. Across the yard, women move like water around stones. Efficient, quiet, unstoppable when gathered. Aunt Phyllis bakes with a precision that shames clocks. She can send a message in the rise of dough. Fast means tonight, slow means next week, a collapsed loaf means run. Mary with the burn scar exchanges news under the cover of asking for a cup of salt. The way she pours is a paragraph, the spill, a punctuation, the pinch on top, a warning. A girl named Annis, small, elastic, almost a rumor, can cross fences without moving a latch. She threads yards like a needle through cloth, leaving only the faintest line behind. None of this exists in official speech. All of it decides what actually happens. Charleston's power arranges itself in panels and pews, committee rooms, where minutes are taken in a hand that forgives itself everything. Church galleries where the sermon leans toward liberation without risking the word. Courtrooms where decisions snap shut like nightfalls. Barracks where patrols trade stories about what they saw and what they wished they saw. Yet the counter-power quiet, shapeless patient arranges itself in kitchens, at pumps, along fence rails at dusk. There is no roster, no flag, no passwords beyond the ones stitched into ordinary gestures. The way a skirt is tucked up for walking means urgency. The way a shawl rides high on the shoulder means you are being watched. The way a loaf is wrapped once or twice means wait or go. It is not a conspiracy. It is survival learning where to breathe. Beyond the city's spine, rice fields flat as a promise, not kept gleaming wet under a sky that cannot help being beautiful. Indigo ghosts the soil. The earth has memory even when records deny it. Small plantations and great ones, each with its own weather, its own grammar of pain and endurance. Women walk levees with baskets balanced, and the future balancing with them. Songs, some born yesterday, some older than the laws that try to silence them, move low across water. You can hear them if you stand very still and admit you are not the center of the story. The tide keeps time. The cranes lift and settle like elders at the end of a long day. Out there beyond, hearing beyond being seen, plans breathe. Not plans like maps with lines and arrows, plans like lungs learning a new rhythm, like a heart deciding it can beat in a different key. We return to the city because the city is where paper pretends to be the only truth. Meetings? Depositions? A confidence that smells like fresh ink. Men magistrates, merchants, patrol captains speak in sentences that do not bend. They say order as if the word can carry a rope without leaving a mark on the tongue. They say safety as if safety were not rationed by skin. They say conspiracy, and the room nods along because the room is built to nod. The bell in the steeple rings on schedule, approving things it cannot understand. Outside those rooms, under eaves, behind rain barrels, beside doors that never opened for the right reason, women edit the day. They remove the words that can get you killed and keep the ones that can get you free. What about the church? Emmanuel African Methodist watched, fined, closed, reopened, watched again. It lives in two registers at once. In the official version, it is a problem to be managed. In the living version, it is a lung, a place where breath gathers and is sent out stronger. The pews are a school of silence, how to listen for what is not said. How to hear a name in the pause between two ordinary words. The hymn choices are maps. When guide my feet rises, it means keep steady. When wade in the water curls through the rafters, it means your path will not be straight. Beck knows the pew that squeaks and avoids it if the night requires silence. She knows which window throws bars of light in morning and which door can be lifted off its hinges without showing a mark. Knowledge is power when you cannot afford power's costume. By afternoon, the heat makes tempers thin. Men bark orders because their collars itch. Women answer softly because softness keeps the day intact. A rumor passes like a shadow from yard to yard. Names. A list. The rope in the corner of the room that smells like new hemp and old decisions. A crimson thread appears in a palm, then disappears into a pocket. Later it will be tied around a wrist so that in the dark, two hands can find each other without a word. Beck inventories her heart fear folded small, hope ironed flat so it looks like resignation, love never tidy enough to pass inspection. She ties her head wrap for walking, not working. There is a difference only the living ever notice. And then she waits. Because waiting can be a weapon, and weapons don't announce themselves before they are needed. Night in Charleston is not night everywhere else. The dark here has corridors. It has doors where there were none in daylight. It has watchers, and it has saints. Women who place a hand on a doorframe and feel for the echo of footsteps that passed hours ago. Patrols clip-clop. Lanterns swing. Shadows multiply like rumors. A mother hums a lullaby. With one note change the extra beat where children learn to step around terror without naming it. A man swears he saw a figure near a shuttered church, maybe a woman, maybe a cat, maybe his own fear dressed as a person. In rooms across the city, bowls of water sit still enough to become mirrors. People ask the water for answers because it is the only thing in Charleston that will reflect a face without judgment. This layered atmosphere of breath iron, paper, and prayer is our stage. A city humming with contradictions, prosperity, and panic hymn and halter, where a mother's quiet is not surrender, but calibration. Every corner holds a choice. Every choice leaves a trace the record will not keep. The power centers will insist that the story belongs to them. Minutes verdicts, gallows measurements. But the real narrative belongs to the yards, the kitchens, the alleys. To the red thread and the wrapped loaf and the head wrap tied for walking. To the bowl of water and the cloth boat pointed at the door. And Beck, still as a pin driven through cloth, feels the city's pulse under her feet. The boards murmur old words. The window bars of light climb the wall. In the lane a cartwheel hits a rut and time stutters. Then flows again. She breathes. Because breath is jurisdiction before paper arrives. She listens. Because listening is how the unrecorded survives. She waits. Because in Charleston, 1822, waiting is not delay, it is choreography. The night will choose its hour. She will be ready moving when the alley darkens, pausing when a lantern coughs, vanishing against wood when a laugh carries too far. The city writes itself in ink. She writes herself in motion. And by dawn both stories will claim to be the truth, one loud, confident official, the other quiet, precise, unforgettable. The record begins, as it always does, with paper. Charleston, June 1822. The smell of ink heavier than the sea breeze, the scratch of quills deciding who will live and who will not. In the ledgers of men, the story starts with discovery with a plot, a conspiracy, a scheme against the city. In the ledgers of women, it began long before, with the word no. With the refusal to sell freedom, even when paid for in full. They called it the VC conspiracy, though the plan was never written down and the proof was never truly found. They said it began in the church in whispers in psalms that bent too close to rebellion. They said men met at night to talk of escape of ships of blades hidden in plain sight. They said the city stood on the edge of fire, but the living truth was quieter, more fragile, and for that very reason, more dangerous. Beck's name appears nowhere. Not in testimony, not in lists, not in the clean, cruel lines of the trials that followed. She exists between sentences, the wife of a certain carpenter, a woman observed near the pump, a servant found to have spoken with one under suspicion. That is all. 3 shadows of a life. Step outside the paper into the alleys, the paper's voice did not reach, and her story begins to breathe. The first clue comes from a water pump. A woman drawing water late at night hears footsteps, not patrol, not drunkards, just soft, deliberate pacing. She turns. A low voice says, "The city sleeps like a guilty man." She answers, "Then don't wake it." That exchange, kept alive in the mouth-to-ear memory of Charleston's quarters, became a proverb, a code, a lullaby disguised as advice. It was Beck's voice, they say, measured, steady. The tone of someone who has learned to make silence speak louder than shouting. In the official record, silence is suspicion. In folklore, silence is mastery. The documents continue the handwriting shifts, as if fear enters the ink. Depositions gathered by men who do not believe in ghosts, but fear them anyway. Witnesses confess that the plan has touched every corner of the city, that women carry messages in bread baskets, that hymns change their last notes to signal a meeting, that market gossip has become the language of war. One printed account claims a patrolman saw a woman at the African church door 3 nights before the arrests, her face lifted, as if listening, a head wrap bright enough to be remembered. Another, carried only by breath, says a red thread was tied to the church handle to mark safety for that night. Documents and whispers disagree, and in the narrow space between them, truth stands. There's a saying in the Low Country, when they hang the men, the women hold the wind. No one has found its first speaker. Elders say it was born that summer after the arrests, when hammers built gallows in daylight. They say, when the rope creaked, a wind rose from nowhere hot, sudden angry, sweeping the market square clean of dust. Old women nodded, the mothers were speaking. Fact. Folklore. 2 mirrors facing each other, reflecting a truth the record cannot contain. Return to paper for a moment. Court transcripts, confession, denial, invention, all sharing the same confident hand. At least 131 arrests, 35 executions, dozens sold away to silence the rest. The men's names are preserved: Denmark VC, Peter Poyas, Gula Jack. Read closely and you find omissions with the weight of presence, the wife of VC. Refused to answer. A woman believed to be connected, a servant who visited the jail door and was turned away. The servant, unnamed, unseen, unremembered, was Beck. Charleston was full of laws about women, when to walk, what to wear, which gatherings were improper. No law anticipated a woman who broke none of them and defied them anyway. Beck's defiance was domestic, invisible. She baked, she washed, she carried. And through those motions, she moved information as lightly as breath between heartbeats. They say she baked a loaf with a single seed pressed in the crust, indigo seed from the fields outside the city, and gave it to a woman who later hid a message in a bolt of cloth dyed the same blue. When the cloth arrived, the color itself spoke, wait until full moon. None of this sits in an archive box. The pattern, though, the rhythm matches the city's panic. Folklore does not contradict the archive. It finishes its sentences. There is another faint voice, a man imprisoned with VC, long lived enough to talk years later. He said simply that the women were the safest messengers, because no one looked at them twice. Pride and pain carried in equal measure. Their silence was their sword. Shift the lens not to the men in chains, but to the city itself. Houses watching like spectators who pretend not to enjoy the show. June 16th, Sunday. The African church closed, guards posted, patrols doubled, doors slammed at the sight of certain faces. Amid that fear, smaller rituals endured. At dawn, a woman poured water from a jug into a bowl. Some said the surface would catch before the city did the ripple of a name soon to be taken. When the water trembled without wind, she whispered, "Let the river remember." She became the root of a legend, still told in certain lanes, the water mother, the one who saw names in still water. Some say she was Beck. Others say she was every mother who ever waited by a door that did not open again. The line between fact and legend dissolves like sugar in tea. But taste it, and you will know it is true. Newspapers sharpened their quills. A servile insurrection prevented. Order restored. 3 papers, near identical phrases, ink with the particular smugness of victory. In the quarters that night, a different report, and the wind from the church fire blew east toward the harbor. The smell reached the water. Sailors on anchored ships heard singing faint, distant a hymn, echoing under the tide. The refrain remembered 2 generations later. Light go out in the city, but the mothers still see. A line half threat, half promise. Beck was last glimpsed by those who dared to look near the jail at Magazine Street, hands clasped a small bundle under her arm. A patrol ordered her away. She turned into an alley and vanished into Charleston's brick and shadow geometry. The record ends. The folklore begins. They say she left behind the bowl of water and the cloth boat. They say, when the gallows rose, the bowl cracked along its center. They say when the first body fell, the water spilled not clear but tinged like rust. From that day forward, no house near the harbor could keep still water long. It would ripple once then calm, as if stirred by unseen breath. You cannot footnote such stories. You can only trace the pattern they leave on a city's habits. Yet evidence the kind scholars accept gives another thread. In 1866, a Freedmen's Bureau agent recorded an elder known only as Mother B. She spoke of the year the rope came of the man who built things and talked too much, and of his woman who carried the prayers in her dress folds. She ended, they say, I live to tell it. I say I live to remember it. Not proof, but continuity. History is not always a perfect chain. Sometimes it survives as a stubborn vine. Fact and folklore weave like indigo threads, blue staining the hands that touch it, memory staining the tongues that speak it. Separate them, and you lose the rhythm that held truth together. Fact tells what the city recorded, arrests executions, proclamations of restored order. Folklore tells what the city forgot, women who refused to vanish even with no names to vanish under. Beck's revenge was not fire, nor blade, nor shouted defiance. It was survival, the most ungovernable act of all, and the slow, deliberate engineering of memory so persistent that paper eventually would have to follow it. In certain quarters, even now, people speak of nights when the air thickens and a faint tapping comes from the walls, as if someone still folds cloth, still kneads dough, still moves messages hand to hand. They call it the mother's wind, soft, steady, determined. And each June, near the date of the uprising, that almost was, the harbor ripples once for no reason. Then stills. Locals call it the bowl remembering. History ends her in silence. Folklore begins her in soundless motion. The whisper of thread through cloth, the gloss of water over wood. The breath before a door opens. Carry both across this narrow bridge from paper to breath, from ledger to lullaby. The city never forgot the men's rebellion, but it could not erase the woman who held the wind. Beck's story was not buried. It was planted. Somewhere beneath the cobblestones, it still grows not toward the light the city controls, but toward the resonance of names spoken in kitchens, at pumps, under shawls, in that extra beat of a hymn, where people learn to step around terror. And if you listen long enough, if you stand where the alley lifts its own shadow and the window bars of light climb the wall, you will feel it, the careful pressure of a mother's will against an era. Not spectacle, not noise. A discipline of memory, a choreography of survival, and a vow that outlives the rope. Remember her name, Beck. The city begins to speak in warnings. Small at first, then louder. A shopkeeper who never looks up from his ledger glances at Beck's hands just once, then closes the book as if the numbers could catch fire. A patrol changes its route by half a block, as if a rumor had drawn a chalk line on the cobblestones and dared boots to cross it. The bell in the steeple keeps its schedule, but the air around it changes. The tone lands heavier, like news wrapped in iron. People in the lanes begin to talk in half-words, quarter-words looks. A loaf wrapped twice becomes 3 times, not for emphasis, but for confusion. Someone new is listening, and the code must bend without breaking. First incident, an ordinary errand tilts. Honest, airy, and quick, runs a message the way a wind runs a reed light, precise, gone. She steps into a yard she has crossed 100 times. A chair sits wrong, angled to face a gate it never faced before. She doesn't stop. She reties a shoe that does not need tying. She notes the chair, the new angle, the small shine of brass behind the curtain. She leaves with nothing and returns with more than news, a pattern. Beck hears it, stores it, adjusts the map inside her body by half an alley. Tomorrow that yard is no longer a corridor, it is a pond you walk around. Second incident, the pump yields a name. Mary with the burn scar meets Beck at the edge of the market, two women looking like 1,000 other women, the way safety is supposed to look. Mary is too careful to speak. She rinses a tin cup, lets it slip a little, catches it, with an intake of breath that exactly equals one syllable. Mag. It could be anything. Magistrate magazine Magnolia, a woman named Maggie. Beck lifts the bucket, tilts it a fraction. Water runs over the lip with the sound of a second syllable. A zine. There is a jail on Magazine Street. The name sits between them like a third woman. Mary's eyes say, "Not yet." Beck's hands say, "I heard." They step away in different directions, the conversation completed without speech. The risk divided into two walking pieces that cannot be arrested together. Third incident, the African church breathes once more, then is made to hold its breath again. A shutter is nailed from the outside, sloppy. The nail heads gleam like fresh teeth. A boy tries to pry one with a spoon. The spoon bends. The nail does not. Beck passes the shutter without slowing. She lays a sprig of sweet mint on the sill, fresh, deliberate. By nightfall, the mint will be gone. The leaf brewed in water in a kitchen where 4 women stand shoulder to shoulder, and no one mentions why the tea is sweet or why the room smells like the garden behind a closed church. Fourth incident, paper turns knife. A notice is posted naming a man Beck once trusted to carry flour and never spill a grain. The notice says, informant. The word is a trap built of letters. The man's face that afternoon is unchanged, polite, careful, tired. He buys 2 onions and a length of twine. He nods to Beck as he has nodded 100 times. Trust is a door with invisible hinges. Today the hinges squeal. Later, Aunt Phyllis bakes 2 loaves. One rises full, one dips in the middle like a breath being held. She sends the dipped loaf to the man. He eats without noticing the message he is chewing, we know, and that night, for the first time in months, he sleeps badly. Fear makes its own confessions. Fifth incident. Money refuses again. A woman, older, shrewder, name never recorded, brings folded bills to a desk and asks to purchase her daughter. The clerk counts slowly like a cat watching a bird. He says the daughter is not for sale. The owner intends to keep her until the child she carries is born, until value increases. The woman nods. She adjusts her shawl so it rides high on her shoulder, signal for watched. When she passes Beck later, the shawl has slipped low, signal for move. That night, a girl disappears from a yard where a dog never barked. If you listen to the city closely, you can hear the sound a chain makes when it fails to hold quiet as a coin set down carefully so it won't be heard. Sixth incident, Magazine Street. Beck approaches the jail in daylight empty-handed, except for a scrap of cloth folded small enough to hide in the palm. She does not approach the door. She approaches the wall. Walls remember hands. She sets her palm against warm brick and stays as long as a woman might stay to cool a fever on her brow. Inside, a man lifts his head because the air shifted. He cannot say how. He only knows the shift feels like a yes that isn't foolish. A guard coughs. Beck turns away with the speed of ordinary caution. The cloth remains in her hand. Nothing exchanges. Everything does. Seventh incident, laughter marks a boundary. On Anson Street, 2 patrolmen laugh too loudly at nothing. Laughter that lands wrong is a sign the way a bird that will not settle is a sign. Beck makes a detour. She passes a seamstress bent over a hem needle flashing. The seamstress's fingers are quick because her mother's were. Food passes forward, stitches pass forward, silence passes forward, and so, without announcement, do maps. A block south, Beck re-enters the lane as if the detour were her original plan. That night, a raid sweeps Anson Street and finds no one worth boasting about. A man brags anyway. The city applauds itself for catching ghosts it invented. Eighth incident: wind. Invents a rumor, or the rumor invents a wind. The morning the gallows posts are measured, a hot gust runs straight down. Broad picks up dust and throws it against the windows of men who prefer their discomforts small and private. They close shutters. The wind rattles them. A clerk mutters that the climate is uncooperative. In the quarters, old women look up and do not smile. They have the look people wear when a thing they prayed for arrives in a form they did not specify. Ninth incident: songs. Adjust. A child hums a tune with an extra beat at the end, the same extra beat we heard before, Terror's step around remembered as music. His mother hushes him, then lets him finish, then hums it back, same tune. No extra beat, teaching the standard version to cover the truth like a blanket laid over a sleeping infant. Songs survive by having two skins. One you show, one that keeps you warm. 10th incident: bread becomes a compass. Beck carries a loaf wrapped once, then twice, then once again. In a city where wrapping signal equals timing, the third wrap unwrapped means tonight delayed. She crosses a courtyard at dusk and leaves the loaf on a step that does not belong to her. Later, a woman retrieves it, unwraps, rewraps, and takes it to a third house. By the time the loaf reaches Aunt Phyllis, it has traveled a perfect square around a block that patrols believe belongs to them. Aunt Phyllis breaks the bread, smells, the crumb says nothing, bakes again. 11th incident: betrayal almost finds a mouth. A boy too eager to be a man repeats a phrase he thinks will impress other boys. We will be seen and not afraid. A passing man hears, turns, tilts his head, files it away, with the tidy smile of someone who knows exactly where to take a sentence to make it profitable. That night, the boy's mother, who has seen that smile before, walks him to the back step and teaches him a different phrase. We will be safe and not seen. He says it badly at first, then better, then by morning it fits his tongue. 12th incident: salt changes pockets. Beck keeps salt in hers, a ward older than her grandmother, older than the city. On a day when the air wants to peel the skin from every patient's soul, she meets a woman at the pump who has never believed in old things. Beck presses the salt into her palm without ceremony. The woman laughs, then doesn't. Later, when the patrol questions grow close to her door, she remembers the weight of the salt and keeps her voice even. Faith can be borrowed. Courage, too. 13th incident: paper makes a mistake. A printer's hand slips. A notice that should name one man names two. A second name appears that does not belong to any planned arrest. The city tells itself the error is harmless. The man with the accidental name vanishes by dawn. Accidents force decisions. Decisions force maps to redraw themselves. The patrol on Meeting Street is suddenly hunting a ghost of its own creation, while someone real walks past them, with her shawl riding high, watched, then low move. 14th incident: water refuses its bowl. In Beck's room, the bowl that once sat still as a dare carries a small wave from one rim to the other and back again for no reason the eye can find. This is not a sign she would trust on its own. But signs like stitches strengthen each other when laid close. She doesn't move the bowl. She moves herself. She knots the head wrap for walking, not working. She straightens the shirts on the peg, kisses each one with her thumb. She opens the door. The lane has the bright emptiness of a stage before the actors arrive. 15th incident: two worlds brush. In a counting house, a merchant sharpens a quill and drafts a letter in which the word order appears 3 times in the first 2 lines. In a back kitchen, Aunt Phyllis cuts 6 loaves with a knife that has learned the names of days. In the churchyard, grass grows in a pattern no one notices except the children, who always notice everything. In the jail, a man sleeps for the first time in weeks because the heat has defeated fear. In the yard behind Beck's room, a cat claims the warmest spot like a lord, as if cats had invented empires. The city pretends these are separate scenes. They are not. Something moves between them like current. 16th incident. The choice that is not dramatic becomes the hinge. A woman call her Liza because the record will not faces a door with her hand on the latch. On the other side are two men sent to ask polite questions that have impolite answers. She takes her hand off the latch. She sits down. She begins to mend a shirt. When they knock, she lifts her eyes and says, "You may wait." The master is out. She does not offer water. She does not offer a chair. She does not step aside. Waiting becomes a wall no man can charge without admitting he is more afraid than he wants to be. The men leave with dignity and tact and nothing else. Beck passes Liza later and squeezes her hand once payment rendered in full. 17th incident. The city rehearses its triumph. Hammers ring, ropes are measured. A crowd shape forms in the imagination of men who enjoy orderly spectacles. Yet the streets do not yield their straight lines easily. Corners blur, alleys absorb, doors forget how to open to the wrong knock. The rehearsal fails because the stage does not cooperate. Pride like paper tears if pulled too fast. 18th incident. Beck tests the edge. She crosses Exchange Street at an hour she has always avoided. Two patrolmen at the far end do not see her, because the sun has chosen to bless her side of the street with glare. She steps into the wash of light and becomes briefly an argument the city cannot win. When she reaches shade again, she does not hurry. Victory learns to walk, not run. 19th incident. News arrives as a smell. Tar sharp, wood clean cut, hemp new. The gallows are no longer a rumor. They are lumber delivered under the ordinary banner of commerce. Men discuss lengths and spans like bridge builders. A child asks what is being built. A mother says, a warning. The child asks who needs warning. The mother does not answer. Answering would make her part of the thing being built. 20th incident. A message chooses its carrier. Beck has a scrap of cloth and a word. The cloth is a small white from a child's shirt. The word is east. She slips the cloth into a crack in a fence on Broad where a breeze always runs. Someone will find it by noon, the someone who knows to look where the wind likes to travel. If the scrap is gone by mid-afternoon, the word has moved. If it remains at dusk, the word is wrong. By dusk, the crack is empty. Charleston tightens. Patrols double then stagger. Heat eats discipline. Fear eats certainty. Beck sleeps in pieces an hour, a half hour. None but the pieces fit like a quilt that knows every seam. In dreams she walks a staircase with 13 steps, the 13th always one higher than her foot expects. She does not wake at the top. She wakes at the bottom, which is to say, she wakes with more work to do. Rising incidents are not explosions. They are increments, grains of sand piling until the shape becomes a dune that moves the map. A chair angled wrong, a shawl riding high, a loaf wrapped thrice. Then not a boy's phrase corrected a guard who coughs at the wrong time, a wind that chooses a street, a bowl that refuses to be still. These are the hinges on which a city turns. The men in offices will not feel the turn until their pens skid. The women in yards feel it in their knees, in the way they lift a bucket, in the rhythm of steps they teach their children, so the children will live long enough to forget why the rhythm exists. Beck stands in her doorway and watches the light make bars again. She smiles without sweetness. Bars are honest. Walls lie. She takes a breath that belongs to her and no one else. Then she steps into the lane where the city's two musics meet, official and underground, so she can carry the next small decision from one beat to the other. The incidents have risen. The hour approaches. The rope sleeps like a snake in a corner room that believes itself important. She walks not to feed the rope's hunger, but to starve it one unremarkable choice at a time, until the city must admit the obvious: what it calls order is only fear in a uniform, and what it calls conspiracy is a mother learning to hold the wind. There is the story the city told about itself, and the counter-story the centuries quietly assembled. To see both, we have to walk past the gallows and into the after rooms, ledgers, circulars, migration tallies, then listen again for the hymn beneath them, the one that kept its extra beat. Fact first, then the other current that doesn't use paper but never loses the plot. After the summer of 1822, Charleston's officials congratulated themselves. In print order, restored danger, averted example made. The trials were closed to those who could have testified otherwise. The transcripts were curated like exhibits, sharp corners sanded, inconvenient edges filed away. A handful of men named numbered executed became the city's chosen explanation for its panic. The women who had carried the breath of the plan were repositioned as scenery. Beck was positioned as absence. That is one way to stabilize a narrative, reduce the chorus until the soloist sounds inevitable. But history is not a courtroom with a single door. It is a house with back stairs and a yard gate that never learned to latch. Evidence we inherited from later years, reconstruction petitions, Freedmen's Bureau case files, church membership rolls, rewritten under new light, lets the camera pan wider. You see the same families appear and reappear across decades and counties. You see mothers listed as Ed when no one was watching. You see signatures that were once marks, then become names, then become legible hands that learned their own width on the page. In those registers, a seam runs back to 1822, like a stitch you can follow with your fingers. And when you follow it, you find an organizing intelligence that official memory refused to print women's labor as logistics, women's silence as encryption, women's roots as countermaps. Fact 2 draws a larger arc after war, and emancipation. Thousands left the coast for upcountry farms, for river towns, for western promises under big skies. Exodusters rolled in wagons that threw dust like incense. Trains carried families whose last memory of Charleston was a bell that hesitated and then rang hard. In a Kansas ledger, someone wrote B in the column for mother. In a Mississippi county book, an old woman refused to spell her children's names out loud. She made the clerk read her lips as if paper might eat sound the way Charleston once ate futures. The clerk wrote stubborn. The record does that sometimes mistakes survival for temperament. But read enough of these notations and you begin to hear a voice moving beneath them. It's not the loud note of defiance. It's the held note of persistence, the one that doesn't break, the one you only notice when those around it tire. Reconstruction flickered like a lantern in wind, bright, then bruised, then bright again. Petitions asked for protection of black churches from summary interference. Deeds were contested. Schools were founded. Night riders regulated the hope out of counties that had just learned to breathe. In that churn, you meet descendants who carried a practice from the old city into new places. The habit of counting who is missing before counting who arrived. The ritual of placing a bowl of water on a windowsill the night before a dangerous day. The choice to teach a hymn with the extra beat, then teach the same hymn without it, so children could pass in two worlds without tripping. Those are facts of culture, observable, repeatable. Yet the archive has no folder labeled techniques of maternal survival. It should. It would be a thick one. Shift to Harlem, 1920s. Another register of Fact 2. Newspapers called it Renaissance. Churches called it continuity with instruments. Choirs held notes until rooms redefined their shape. Poets cut lines that looked like Charleston's lanes, narrow then bright, then narrow again. Veterans returned with stories of phantom footsteps on European roads, of nights when a segregated unit heard a parade no one else heard, and woke to find their names misprinted in casualty lists, fate unknown. The phrase traveled old and new at once. In a rent-party kitchen on 135th, an aunt sets a glass bowl on a radiator to keep it warm, then moves it to the sill and stares into it until the water loses the face of the room and becomes simply water again, unreadable, therefore merciful. Someone laughs. She does not. She knows what a bowl can carry. The folklore, too, current enters not as a contradiction, but as a correction, an annotation written in breath. It says the African church in Charleston did not die when its shutters were nailed. It tunneled under the years like a root searching for water. It says there were nights in the 1870s when a congregation in a new wooden chapel would feel air thicken at the doxology, and elders would look to the window where bars of moonlight fell and nod unspoken recognition of a room that once taught them how to breathe. It says some families kept a small jar of indigo seed on the mantle, not for planting but for color, so a cloth swatch could be dyed as a message without words. It says that when daughters left for northern cities, their mothers sewed a red thread along the inner seam of a single dress, barely visible, impossible to forget. So the wearer would remember which door to choose when the city offered two, one lit, one safe. Factory 2 has other documents, sheriff's reports, misplaced letters, edges of testimonies clipped by the scissors of routine. A sheriff in 1881 records that a colored woman refused to give a statement about a night rider's visit. He underlines refused, as if the emphasis could convert her silence into insolence. Read with the ear, folklore 2 has taught us to use. You hear a more precise sentence. She withheld what would be misused. In the 1890s, a teacher notes that a child cannot clap a steady 4 because the family's hymn version always holds a pause on the last bar. The teacher writes deficiency. The child writes a life that dodges certain blows by half a breath. Both records survive. Only one keeps you alive. Folklore Chantu carries a darker braid rituals at the edge of sanctioned faith. In some quarters along the coast, women gathered just before dawn at crossroad pumps to pour the first water back to the ground, payment, they said, for what the earth had held for them without testimony. They tied red thread around wrists when a journey began, and cut it only when a safe house took the traveler in. They would not leave mirrors uncovered on nights when the moon drew bars across the floor. Mirrors could learn the names meant to be hidden. They placed a pinch of salt in the pocket of any child sent on an errand through a street that had recently learned a policeman's new name. These things are called superstition by those who are supervised by paper and guarded by doors with locks on the inside. By those who had neither, they were called practices. You practice what you must repeat perfectly. And yet none of this operates outside the realm of evidence, if you allow evidence to include the long memory of communities. Ask the women in Beaufort whose grandmothers told them to count the quiet things. Ask the choir leaders who can tell you without looking when a congregation switches from survival key to praise key, same melody, different oxygen. Ask the archivists who have learned to read for absences who mark the page where a woman is wife of with a pencil note that says simply center of. In that collaborative rereading, Beck returns not as a ghost begging belief, but as a method, a grammar, a way of making the century move an inch and then another without shouting at a wall that cannot hear. The payoff of Fact 2 is not a revelation that cancels what came before. It is a ledger balancing in a different light. You begin to see how the 1822 pattern, women setting tempo, choosing corridors, controlling the decibel of hope, reappears wherever Black communities reorganize themselves under surveillance. You see it in church mothers who sit by the door not only to greet, but to count. You see it in funeral processions that alter their route 2 blocks from the cemetery because a patrol has parked where it ought not. You see it in a mother's refusal to speak a child's full name in public until the child can cross a street alone without drawing attention. Names are magnets. Magnets attract filings. Filings cut skin. Folklore 2's payoff is different. It is the moment an old phrase, fate unknown, is returned to sender. In the city's mouth, it meant we stopped counting. In the mother's mouths, it means we refuse to let you count for us. The rope had a schedule. The women kept another. The transcript had a period. The hymn kept its breath at the end of the line. The city archived its victory in stone. The women archived their survival in ritual. One crumbles when the weather turns. The other is weather. Return once more to Beck's room, the bowl of water, the cloth boat, the bar light marking time. In the ledger of men, that room is missing a non-place without coordinates. In the ledger of women, it is a template copied into kitchens, from Charleston to Chicago, from the Sea Islands to the Sound. Where the bowl cannot sit, a glass will do. Where cloth is scarce, a folded page, blank becomes the boat. Where bars of light do not fall, someone will draw them on the floor with chalk, so the story has its marks, and the actor, always a mother, knows where to stand when it is time to choose. So the weave tightens, Fact 2 hemming in what can be named. Folklore 2 hemming it from the other side. Between those edges, a garment holds sturdy enough to be worn by a century. The city's official narrative remains what it always was, brisk, confident, satisfied. Our counter-narrative remains what it must be, precise, patient, cumulative. If you listen, you can hear stitch against stitch. Thread slipping through cloth, a rhythm older than the courtroom's gavel. And suddenly the old dichotomies wither. Evidence versus story, history versus memory, rope versus breath. They were never opposites. They were two materials building the same bridge. Beck is not a footnote to a man's uprising. She is the technique by which a people carried fire through water. The record would not write her down. So the centuries did. In petitions and pews, in salt and thread, in bowls and songs with one extra beat, the counter-archive accumulates until even stone begins to listen. And when much later a scholar places her palm on a Charleston brick warmed by June sun and feels not heat, but pressure, as if a hand once pressed here and asked the wall for a yes. That too is Fact 2 repeatable by anyone willing to stand still long enough, and Folklore 2, because the wall speaks only to those who ask in the old way. We do not have to prove the mothers held the wind. We only have to notice that the city's dust still moves when certain names are spoken. That water still ripples once each June without a breeze. That hymns still carry a pause where terror was taught and hope corrected it. These are not decorations on history. They are its scaffolding. And if you find yourself tonight placing a glass of water on a sill without knowing why, if you find yourself humming the last line of a song and leaving a breath where no one told you to, then the method has reached you. That is the quiet justice of this ledger. It multiplies by being remembered. Fact 2 closes its folder. Folklore 2 closes its hand. The room remains. The bowl is full. The cloth boat points where it always did, toward the door. Across time, the room widens. What began as a bowl, a cloth boat, a window's bar light becomes a corridor that runs from Charleston, 1822, to places the city could not imagine, prairie crossroads, where exodusters pitched tents under improbable stars. Northern streets that glitter and listen at the same time. Battle roads in another century where boots crunch snow and men swear they hear marching behind them, though no unit is scheduled. The bridge is not made of stone. It's built from continuities, the held breath at the end of a hymn, the way names are carried against the chest, the habit of counting who is missing before you count who arrived. The archive calls these coincidences. The mothers call them instructions. Open a drawer in a courthouse 2 states away, thin air dust like talc, and find a petition, half signed, half refused. A woman's mark sits where a name ought to be. The line above it is torn. The clerk who filed this used a knife to square the page and cut away the only handwriting that mattered. What remains is the pressure around the absence, the faint trough a firm hand leaves in paper. Read the trough. It says I was here. A century later, a historian will lay tracing paper over that indentation and pull from it a letter shape B or K depending on the angle of the light enough for a guess enough to understand why some stories choose secrecy as armor. Bridge again. Harlem, a Saturday night, when the block breathes like a drum. When tenements have become choirs and kitchens have become embassies. An elder from Beaufort leans against a radiator and listens to a trumpet find a note that isn't on the page. She smiles not for the note, but for the pause before it. There she thinks. That is where we lived. The half-breath men with uniforms didn't hear. She keeps a glass bowl on her sill the way her mother told her to, and once each June she pours the water back into the street quiet libation to the city that tried to swallow her and failed. People call it superstition. She calls it punctuation. Bridge again, France. Winter, a segregated unit on a black road without moon. A private named Harris stops because, though he will call it nothing later, he hears boots where there are none. He raises his hand. The column behind him holds. A shell glides over the place where they were meant to be 10 seconds earlier and buries itself in a field. Later, men will argue about the reason. Harris will shrug and say his mother taught him to listen for footsteps you cannot see. The sergeant writes good instinct in a report. Harris writes a letter home without mentioning any of it and tells his wife to keep a jar of salt next to the stove for the children's pockets. All of this is the bridge, the quiet technologies of survival carried forward. But a bridge is only a means. It asks for a crossing, and a crossing asks for a moment one you can point at and say there. Return to Charleston. The city rehearses triumph. The rope studies the light. The gallows smell of new wood, clean as a lie. Beck reads the signs with the calm of someone who has rehearsed for years, then changes only one small thing. Not the night, not the church, not the headline. The path. She takes a corridor the city does not know exists because it has always mistaken domestic work for stillness. That corridor is kitchens and porches pumps and side doors, a string of rooms where women decide how loud a day is allowed to be. The decision starts with a loaf. Aunt Phyllis bakes 7 one for the house, 6 for yards that have no business smelling this good. At each stop, the loaf does what loaves do. Feeds, softens, steadies, and also what messages do, aligns tempo. Wrapped, once wrapped, twice, unwrapped once. The pattern shifts from yard to yard until the night has a rhythm. Men in offices do not hear. The plan, if you insist on that word, is not to burn, nor to break, nor to fight the city in its favorite language. The plan is to move the center. To gather in a room the city has not inventoried and decide what can be saved and how fast. The room chosen is not the church is watched. It is not the market has ears. It is a laundry behind a house whose owner is traveling with a chimney that pulls smoke straight up and a floor that drinks water without stain. Beck arrives last. She brings nothing that can be written down as contraband. She brings only a word east and her calibration. Around her, Mary with the burn scar, Liza who barricades men with waiting, Annis coiled like a held breath. 2 elders who remember children born nameless and named later in kitchens. No one speaks first. Silence must bow to the work before it is allowed to advise it. When they do speak, they do not say uprising. They say children roots, papers timing. They redraw the map of the city with what they own. Steps, errands, kinship, so that by morning a handful of bodies will be somewhere other than where the rope expects them. It is not a headline victory. It is a ledger victory. Names that would have been entered under example, made will never appear. Names that might have been erased will become difficult to write over because too many people will know where those bodies are sleeping, whose aunt, whose cousin, whose Sabbath visitor. But the city is not a fool. It suspects the gravity has shifted because its victories feel suddenly light. Patrols angle harder. Doors that used to bow to a badge resist by a width of wood you can't see. A clerk mislays a paper he meant to mislay. A rider's horse stumbles on Meeting Street as if the cobbles themselves have changed their minds. The afternoon rattles with tokens of impatience. A man spits where he should not. Another laughs at an hour too solemn for laughing. Beck feels the timing fracture and makes the choice that will become the fulcrum of our story. She will not go to the jail door. She goes to the jail wall, not to press her palm in simple sympathy, though she will do that. And the brick will hold the warmth longer than law allows. She goes because a guard at the door is being watched by another guard, but the guards do not watch walls. She goes because if enough women in enough yards tonight decide east, the tide will be low on the Marsh Road. And there is a house there with a widow who once worked in a laundry and knows exactly how many shirts a day the city's morals can dirty. She goes because the men in offices cannot imagine that the pivot happens here at brick, not oak. At breath height, not speech height. She goes to say a name without saying it and carry an answer without a word. Climax is small. That is its courage. Her palm finds the brick. It is warm. The day has been long. Memory rises through her body like a second spine, paper refused passwords. Learned the weight of a child's shirt on a peg, the cut of a clerk's. No, the angle of a chair that faced the wrong gate, the slice of a nail hammered into a shutter from the outside. The warble in a bell that hesitated and then did its duty. She does not ask the wall for a miracle. She asks it to continue. Brick remembers pressure. Pressure alters breath. Breath moves through a window and touches a man who has been told that hope is a juvenile habit. He lifts his head. He will later say nothing about this because he cannot. The legal language he is allowed to use does not include the vocabulary of mothers. But in the moment he stands and turns his own breath into a message. A cough the guard thinks is weather. A step that sounds like fatigue. A scrap of cloth white from a child's shirt slid between stones where the mortar is old. East. Beck lifts her hand. The warmth lingers. The wall keeps the promise. She walks away at the speed of laundry, unremarkable, ordinary, enduring. Passing Anson Street, she hears laughter land wrong and crosses before the light can decide whether it belongs to day or night. At the pump, she takes water she does not need to make the errand look truer to anyone who cares to judge truth by buckets. Near the church, shuttered, watched, faithful anyway, she leaves nothing because nothing is exactly what is safe there. The city sees her pass, measures her as inventory, finds the sum the same as yesterday, and relaxes by a hair. Night. Kitchens glow. A map reknots itself into bodies. A girl who was meant to be counted in the morning as evidence of order sleeps on a pallet in a widow's room with the window cracked to whatever mercy the marsh can send. A boy who was to be used as a warning plays with a cat and learns a softer definition of authority. A man in a cell hears boots where there are none and does not mistake them for ghosts this time. He hears practice. He hears the future rehearsing itself one corridor away. Morning. The gallows stand like arithmetic. The town gathers its moral appetite and pretends to swallow cruelty without choking. A clerk reads a list and stumbles where a name should be because the name is not in the room. Another name is mispronounced on purpose to hide the fact that the mouth does not know how to own it. The bell rings on time. Dust rises stupidly in sunlight. Someone claims victory. Then someone else, because victory requires echo. But the echo is thinner than it was last week. The city does not understand its own acoustics have changed. We do. The climax is not the rope. It is the refusal to let the rope control the grammar of the day. It is the redefinition of plot from a crime to a choreography, the setting of steps that make brutal schedules miss. It is the transfer of jurisdiction from paper to breath, from door to wall, from spectacle to logistics. Beck's choice palmed a brick word to mortar, root to marsh bowl. Undisturbed on a table that looks like any other table, tilts the narrative from tragedy performed to ledger corrected. After the bridge remains. It will continue to carry small decisions across large eras. A red thread in a seam, a reheated hymn, a glass of water on a sill, a boy taught to pause before the curb, because some streets keep secrets, a woman who counts quiet things and writes a life the record will only recognize in hindsight. When people ask years later, "What did you do?" Beck's descendants will answer the way victors of housekeeping answer everything important, with verbs that look too small to win wars. We baked. We waited. We walked east. We listened for footsteps no one else had the ear for. We moved names out of reach of easy counts. We held the wind. That is the climax, unphotographable, undeniable. Not a single door kicked. Not a single torch lit. A city that insists on seeing only what it can punish misses the moment entirely. The wall remembers. The bowl remembers. The cloth boat points where it always did, toward the door. And the bell that hesitated in our opening finds its voice again, not to sanctify the sentence of men, but to score the rhythm of mothers who rewrote the day without asking permission. Remember her name? Not because she is a symbol, but because this method of survival has a maker, Beck. The rope did what ropes do. Then weather did what weather always does. It softened wood, unbraided fibers taught proud structures the humility of rain. Charleston moved on in the way cities are trained to move on accounts balanced. Shop doors opened sermons, trimmed to fit patrol ears. The chapter closed, or said it did. But the methods women carried quiet roots, calibrated pauses. The habit of counting who is missing before you count who arrived did not end on paper's schedule. They traveled. North with the trains, west with the wagons, inland with riverboats that read the banks like scripture. Out of the city that refused her, Beck's discipline became a household grammar. How to hide a name in plain sight. How to thicken a silence until it holds like rope. How to turn waiting into a blade that cuts timetables down to size. In port towns and prairie shanties, new addresses with old weather mothers set bowls of water on sills and watched the surface steady itself. If it rippled without breeze, they revised the day. If it held without tremor, they let the children walk the route that had been rehearsed in the mind a dozen times before feet touched earth. Hymns shifted across counties. In some places, the extra beat vanished. In others, it stayed not as fear, but as muscle memory, a small bend in the music where ancestors lived. Clerks wrote stubborn when a woman refused to say a name aloud. Teachers wrote deficiency when a child clapped on 5. Bosses wrote insubordinate when a laundress folded shirts in an order that put her safety first. The ledger kept mislabeling survival. The people kept surviving anyway. Decades turned. On church steps in cities, the rope never reached. Elders nodded at windows where bars of light crossed at certain hours. Motifs obeying a physics older than ordnance. They told children, remember, bars are honest, walls lie. They taught them to hear footsteps that weren't there yet. Logistics of the spirit practical as salt in a pocket, holy as a door that waits to be opened by the right knock. In 1866, a widow signed a petition with a practiced X and told the agent to write Mother B, where a given name might have gone. In 1881, a sheriff complained that certain women refused cooperation because their tongues had learned how to cost time. In 1927, a choir held a single syllable, until a room remembered it had lungs, and an old man in the back whispered, not for the note, but for the pause before it. That's Charleston's sorrow. Hear how it climbs. Scholars arrived late, as scholars do, and began to read the absences like text. They noticed the indentation where a woman's name had been cut from a page to tidy the record. They traced the trough with thin paper and soft graphite until a curve and a stroke suggested letters. They followed land deeds that moved like migrating birds west in spring, north in winter, and found at odd intervals a pattern of household practices that repeat with the accuracy of clocks. A red thread inside a seam no one would see. A jar of indigo seed kept for color, not harvest. A reluctance to leave mirrors uncovered when the moon climbs a certain angle. An insistence on writing certain names only in recipe books, flour and sugar as cover for the genealogy the court would not respect. Evidence, if you know how to weigh it, not by single documents, but by how many generations a method can carry on its back. History tried to end Beck as an unnamed wife of. Memory refused. It did not turn her into a statue. It turned her into a technique. In kitchens where steam fogged windows, in laundries where wrists turned red from other people's stains, in pews where the squeak in the third board from the aisle was avoided by those who needed certain silences to hold. The technique multiplied. You can count its victories only by their absence from the city's boasts. Names not on lists, bodies not in crowds. Children who lived long enough to forget why their mother made them pause at certain alleys and hum certain endings to otherwise ordinary songs. And then because time also keeps its ledgers. Some things returned. A historian barefoot on pine placed her palm on brick warmed by June and felt pressure where there should have been only heat. A choir in a floodlit church on a night of news too heavy to sing through found itself held by a pause it did not plan. And when the note resumed, people were crying not for the headlines, but for the river in the wall between pew and world that had just carried them across. On a harbor that had learned to mirror suffering without flinching water, rippled once in a year of no wind, and then flattened as if a bowl had been set down and lifted again. None of this undoes the harm. Nothing here claims that a mother's logistics erase the rope. The harm remains like weathered timber in the foundations of houses you think are new. Like iron taste on tongues that never saw iron work done. What changes is jurisdiction. The narrative no longer belongs to the city that preferred its triumphs carved and its terrors notarized. The narrative belongs to rooms, ordinary rooms that laid out a different kind of map and walked it until geography itself blinked. So the film circles back to the square of light on a wall, to a bowl that dared a hand to touch it, to a cloth boat that pointed where language could not go. We began there not because drama likes small places, but because history does. The hinge of this story was not a speech, it was a palm against brick, a word in mortar, a route to the marsh at the hour the tide knew to lower its voice. If you came for spectacle, Charleston will give you plenty gallows measured to the inch headlines with the adjective servile to make cruelty feel like order. If you came for truth, you have to learn to watch what women do when watched. Remember her name, Beck. Not because she is ornament for a man's chapter, not because she can solve alone a city's appetite for fear, but because somewhere between the ledger and the lullaby, she built a practice that outlasted the rope. In every household that keeps water on a sill for reasons no one can articulate without crying. In every church that holds a beat no composer scored. In every archive where a missing name leaves a pressure indelible as ink. She is legible. Not a ghost, a method. If you live in a city with windows that make bars at certain hours, notice them. If you have a mother or a grandmother who taught you to pause before the curb for the sake of just to be sure, honor that pause. It is older than any traffic law. If you keep a name folded in a drawer because paper has not always been kind, unfold it tonight, say it once, then say it into the comments below so strangers can help carry it. Tell us where you are, your street, your hour, the minute your breath hitched when the cloth boat turned. Leave the name of a woman your town forgot, and leave the practice she passed down that kept you alive. We close where we opened, light climbing a wall, dust floating a room deciding. The city will say this chapter ended in 1822. The mothers will say it never ended. It organized. And as long as there is a bowl somewhere reflecting a face no document ever respected, as long as there is a hymn with a held breath, as long as there is a child learning the safe version and the true version of a song, the archive continues in you. You have just walked a corridor history tried to lock. If it steadied you, hold someone else's arm through it. If it lit something, carry that flame under your shawl until it finds its next room. Like, subscribe, share, yes, those things, but more importantly, type the name paper refused. And tell us the practice you will keep, because fate unknown is how a city ends a file, and remember her name is how a people keep a life.